Welcome, everybody. Good evening. I love the size of the audience. Good. My name is Chris Winter. I'm the interim director for Ohio Sea Grant at OSU's Stone Laboratory. I was not able to be with you guys on Sunday for your orientation, but I've heard that things are going well so far. So I'm glad to have you on the island. So Thursday nights on the island, starting in basically mid-June through the end of our term courses, which you guys are the 7th week, and we run 8 weeks. Every Thursday night we have 2 speakers. One we call our research lecture, and then the other speaker is called the guest lecture. And so for this evening, I'm going to introduce both of these gentlemen. Actually, Eric Romich is our first speaker. He's what we quantify as our research speaker tonight. Eric and I have spent some time today, and we've actually talked. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing Eric because he really wants to keep some of that for the meat of his talk. But Eric is an extension agent with Ohio State University. He actually, in part of his talk, is going to tell you what it means to be an extension agent. So I'm not going to steal his thunder in that regard. With that, I would tell you that his early work started off in basically community development. So part of his role was to go out to communities, specifically in Wyandot County here in Ohio, and talk to those communities on how they can, as the title implies, to develop that community, so increase businesses or retain businesses in that area. But since then, he's moved into the realm of renewable energy. So that's what he's going to speak to you primarily about today. So really, I don't want to take too much more of Eric's time and let him kind of do the introduction he wants to do. One last thing I will say about Eric is his work with renewables. You guys have seen now on the island that we have a great solar pavilion down here on the west side of the island, and on the roof of this building we have panels, 90 panels total. That information is on our website in real time. But Eric has just started a partnership with Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Lab and some of our educators to develop curriculum related to that solar panel data. So we're really excited about how that's going to progress here in the next couple months. With that, Eric, please have the floor.
Great. Thanks, Chris. As Chris mentioned, just a real quick overview about myself. I was a county-based extension educator in Wyandot County, working on community development. And a quick show of hands, how many of you understand or are familiar with Ohio State University Extension? Raise them high so we can see. I would say maybe 20%, okay? Real briefly, Ohio State University Extension is a department within the College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Science, and we have educators throughout the state, based at the county level. So as Dean McPheron likes to refer to, it's our brains on the ground. So we have educators that are interacting with communities, with local stakeholders, trying to help address community issues related to agriculture, natural resource, community development, family consumer science, and 4-H youth development. So in many ways, we kind of refer ourselves or look at ourselves as the conduit that helps bridge the gap between the needs at the local level and the application of the critical research that's taking place at the university. So we work hand in hand with faculty throughout the university to make sure that we're addressing community issues. Now, personally, in Wyandot County, I served as the director of their economic development organization and worked hand in hand with their local stakeholders that ran a nonprofit. I also did some work related to land use planning with the Regional Planning Commission. How I got into renewable energy was through experience. So based on some of the policy changes, we actually developed the state's largest solar field. It's a 85-acre solar field in Wyandot County. It's 159,200 panels. So based on my experience there, I really became interested in renewables, and also not just the technology, but the social interaction between renewable energy and the development process as well. So today we're here to talk a little bit about renewable energy and specifically aiding public officials in the decision-making process. So quick show of hands, how many of you have been to or kind of driven past a large wind farm? All right, most of you. So you have a good point of reference as to what we're talking about. We're looking at, I'm going to reference a case study specifically related to wind farm development. What we've seen in Ohio, following 2008 and a little bit of new policy, which we'll touch on, we really saw an increase in development of large-scale solar, large-scale wind in the state. And so what happens is the way it's set up in Ohio, our county commissioners at the local level, the county level, they basically had the ultimate decision to approve or deny a proposal for these projects to move forward. So that's a lot of responsibility when you think about a project that can generate millions of dollars in local tax revenue, but at the same time, it's going to permanently alter the landscape in that community for decades to come. So that's kind where some of the challenges come in terms of moving forward with these projects. Real quickly, learning objectives I'd like to touch on in the next 40 minutes or so. Set the foundation by summarizing energy trends. We really need to kind of understand what's happening at the national level, international level, before we can get into some of the details. Frame up the situation. Once again, why is this something that is controversial? Why do we need to talk about decision making? Isn't it just a rubber stamp? I mean, it's renewable energy, so it's good, right? There's a little bit more to it than that. We're going to get into that. Discuss the partnership model that evolved in Wyandot County, and then also some of the survey results from that partnership. And then to kind of wrap up, just a summary of our outreach and engagement efforts, and then also just kind of think about how you may apply the process with a different issue. This is talking about wind. It doesn't have to be wind. It could be solar. It could be oil and gas development. So insert issue here, and I think that some of this engagement could apply. Show of hands. How many people have their cell phones with them? You don't have to be afraid. I'm not going to ask you to turn it off. All right, most of you. If you're interested in participating, you can go to this web link, go.osu.edu/engage. Just a couple of poll questions we may reference throughout. You can go there kind of throughout and just provide your input as well. And maybe to get it started, why don't we just start with a quick trivia question. So if you want to go there, see what the first question looks like. And once you're there, if you want to fill out all the questions at once, that's up to you. But we'll kind of peek back in and out of these as we move through, because I think it helps kind of support some of the talking points throughout. So just look at that first question. And this is just a trivia question. I'm not going to give you a final grade on whether it's right or wrong, right? A couple minutes, maybe kind of nod as you get your stuff answered. Okay, and we'll recalculate these as we go forward. So if you haven't yet had a chance to vote, just vote, and I'll update it during the next time that we revisit this. But to answer the question, the answer is 11.2%. So as you look at renewable energy production in the U.S., 11.2% comes from renewables. Now specifically, that 11.2% is made up from 5% biomass, 3% hydroelectric, 2% wind, and then solar and geothermal kind of battling it out for that last percent. So feel free to fill out the rest of those questions, and we'll reference them as we move through here. Now, set the stage on energy trends. Let's talk about consumption. Daniel Yergin, well-recognized energy expert, had a book titled The Quest. And in this book, he talks about consumer behaviors. He's talking about consumer behaviors specifically within this group of 2 million people, about a quarter of the world's population. And Yergin's looking at this group and he's saying, you know, there's going to be significant changes happening with this quarter of the world's population. They're going to be receiving a pay increase. It's going to take them from a per capita income of less than $10,000 a year to a per capita income of $20,000 to $30,000 per year. Yergin's point with this, just this minor change in this demographic population is going to trigger consumer behaviors that there's no amount of conservation and efficiency is going to offset. So, as you can see in the chart, that's just one factor of many that's going to impact global energy consumption. Chart showing the trend. To summarize that for you, over the last 30 years, we've seen an 85% increase globally in energy consumption. That's total energy consumption. From 283 quadrillion BTUs in 1980 to 524 quadrillion BTUs in 2012. Real quick, anyone have any idea how much that was consumed in the United States? Let's bring it a little bit closer to home. Anyone want to take a guess? Throw a number up. 1/5 of it. 1/5. Pretty close. 18%. So 95 quadrillion BTUs in the United States. Of course, we support 4% of the population, so that tends to put a little more context to the problem, right? Now, bring it a little bit closer to home, Ohio typically ranks 5th or 6th in terms of the most energy consumption from a state level. So we're a very heavy consuming state here in Ohio. This impacts all of us, right? Whether you know it or not, it impacts each of you individually. Ohioans spend right around per capita expenditures on energy, $4,269 a year in 2012. Of that, 35% goes to the purchase of gasoline, 28% goes to the purchase of electricity, an additional 16% goes to the purchase of diesel fuel. So it's impacting all of us, right? Energy is a big deal. Let's talk a little bit about prices. As we look at the price per kilowatt hour price of electricity. Now this is kind of a busy chart showing all these different sectors. If we just summarize the average for all sectors in Ohio, 61% increase. From 1990 at 5.8 cents per kilowatt hour to 2015 at 9.83 cents per kilowatt hour. Significant increase, right? Now, if you look at a report from the Department of Energy, this is going to become more of an issue. They report 14 of our power plants, our power generation facilities in Ohio scheduled for retirement. 12 of them scheduled for retirement in 2015. So this isn't something that's happening down the road, it's happening right now. If you want to talk about competitiveness and how does this position Ohio kind of on the global market, if you rank the top 50 states, one being the lowest, the most competitive energy rates, Ohio, 2015 ranking, 36. Our energy prices are creeping up here in Ohio. Why? One example, let's talk about moving the energy from where we generate it to where we need it, right? We need to move it. If you just basically combine these, and once again, this is from the Department of Energy report 2015. If you combine these from this transmission level investment to the distribution, to just represent an investment in the quote-unquote grid, $425 billion since 1997, $23 billion a year. A lot of money just to move the electricity, just to put these power lines in place to move it from where we generate it to where we need it. What's that going to do to our cost chart that we saw in the last slide? Generation. This is just for Ohio. We're looking at Ohio generation plants. It could be coal, it could be natural gas, nuclear, solar, wind. All technologies are included here. To summarize this, gray is bad. Gray is old. If you want to put it in context, 61% of all of our generators are 31 years or older. If you look specifically at coal, 93% of our coal generators are 31 years or older. Most of these facilities are designed to operate for 40, 50, some of them 60 years. So, regardless of whether or not you believe in CO2 emissions impacting the environment from power electric generation, or whether the EPA is going to pass carbon emission standards or not, you can take that discussion off the table. Just based on the age, huge investments are going to need to be made in future decades on generation. So, some policy in terms of energy trends. As I mentioned, there's a policy that drives a lot of this development. In 2008, Ohio passed its first alternative portfolio standards that basically, and there's a lot of details in this, I could give an hour talk just on the policy, but to summarize it, it's mandating that our investor-owned utilities in the state of Ohio generate or diversify their generation of electricity to include 12.5% renewable technologies by the year 2025. Okay? That was in 2008. Following that, shortly after Senate Bill 232, what this does, this addresses the taxation of renewable energy. This is taking and basically Senate Bill 232 is exempting renewable energy projects larger than 250 kilowatts, so over a certain size. These facilities are exempt from paying the public tangible utility tax, and in place they pay a standardized payment in lieu of taxes, so a standardized payment annually to the local government ranging between $6,000 and $9,000 per megawatt. We'll show you in a little bit what that means in terms of a real project, what type of dollars we're talking about. Now, Senate Bill 310 has actually put a 2-year freeze, I don't know if I'm smart enough to use a laser here, a 2-year freeze on Senate Bill 221. So policy gets a little bit murky as you're looking at how you develop a project when the rules of the games are continually changing. Basically, it's a 2-year freeze so the state can analyze the impact of this renewable energy policy to the state's consumers. So in 2017, assuming that there's no changes, the policy will pick right back up, and then it'll extend from 25 to 2027. So, does policy impact development? Well, according to this chart, you better believe it does. In gray, what we're doing is trending the wind capacity, which is illustrated, I don't know why, but my chart's cut off. It labels these on the computer screen. So, over here, we're charting out the gray, which is U.S. wind capacity, and in red, we're charting out Ohio's. And you can see, what we say, 2008, we passed our legislation, renewable energy portfolio standards. A couple years later, boom, wind development. 2 large projects, 304-megawatt project in Van Wert, Ohio, and a 99-megawatt project in Paulding County. Combine those, and that's right about where we're at today. There's a few smaller projects out there contributing, but most of them are made up in those 2 projects. So, take a real quick pause and give me a second to take a drink of water, and let's visit our poll questions to see if anyone else has answered. You need me to give you just a couple minutes to log in again, or has everyone got it? At least nod, or give me some indication what we need to do. Hang on just a second here, okay. Find the refresh button. Actually, I think I need to fill. I got to fill these out so that it'll show for you. That way, I don't have to go to another screen. Okay, we're getting some responses here. Looks like most of us are thinking this is extremely important or very important. Looks like solar is overwhelmingly the top choice. What's the one big problem with solar? Why can't we just do solar? Ohio. It's Ohio. Believe it or not, the technology does work in Ohio. One of the challenges with solar, if we get too much, I mean, at the levels we're at, it's not a big deal. But what happens when the sun goes down? Stop generating electricity, right? So you either have to find an economical way to store it, which we're still pumping water up the hill, and then letting it run down at peak hours. So storage is still an issue with solar. And so that's why the integration of our coal facilities, our natural gas facilities, is critical to the future of renewables. All right, so we kind of worked through the trends. Let's talk about the situation. I don't know if you've picked it up yet, but I like to use a lot of charts and just a lot of pictures. I don't really like to read bullet points unless I really have to. So let's look at the picture. What do we see? What does it mean to you? Who looks at that and thinks, boy, there's an investment of millions of dollars? Who looks at that and thinks, man, that sure is ruining the view shed from my front porch. I don't want to look at that. Some may look at this and think, boy, there's energy security. We're generating energy within our own borders, and it's right here. It's free. It's clean. It's renewable. It's not free. The source is free. Others would look at that and say, I wonder if they're noisy. What kind of shadows are they going to cast? Or you could look at it and say, man, we're generating electricity. You know what? We're not using any water. Boy, those coal facilities are using up all the water, right? Hydraulic fracturing, using water. We're not using water here. Then you could look at it and say, geez, that sure is taking agricultural property out of production, right? That's an issue that we could hear some. So my point is this could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And put yourself in the shoes and just pretend, just close your eyes for a second and say, all right, I'm out of school, I've moved on, I'm now in charge of a county of 30,000 people. I make big decisions. I make the decision on whether 30 or 40,000 people get to look at this, or the other side of the population that may say, this is great, this is an economic engine, it's clean, renewable energy. So you have people on both sides of this aisle saying what their thoughts are, and you're on the hook for making the decision. Who wants to sign up for that? Raise your hand. Who wants to make the decision? What I'm trying to do is frame the situation. I hope it's coming through. So this is the problem. This is the point of aiding public officials in the decision-making process, okay? A couple of quotes from some journal articles, and the citation may be a bit small to read. If you're interested in that, just ask me. I can email the article directly to you. But basically, we're talking about however widely accepted renewable energy is in terms of its environmental benefits. When you get to the development phase, you know, it's the impacts at the local level that tend to cause some issues. So it's almost the greater good of global renewable energy and CO2 emissions up against local land use preservation and local environmental concerns. A lot of people refer to this as green-on-green conflicts. I was actually here earlier this week and reviewing a couple of reports with some Sea Grant folks, and I came across a paragraph. There's one sentence that jumped off the page at me and stuck with me. And it said, all energy decisions will have environmental consequences. Simple sentence. But if you really think about it, it's powerful. All energy decisions, come up with an energy decision, all of them will have And this, once again, just getting to the thought that it's more than economics. It's more than the fact that it's renewable. So it's past just the environmental and the economic discussion. It truly is a discussion of environmental, economic, and social impacts. So it's just, the continued development will need public acceptance. This is an example of the impact that you could see. So 2 of Ohio's largest wind farms. We'll kind of reference the one on the left, and you can read the one on the right. So Blue Creek Wind Farm, 304 megawatts. That'll power around 75,000 homes. I always kind of take that with a grain of salt because it depends on when you're using the electricity, how are you powering your home, how are you using the energy. So, but nonetheless, it's a large project. 152 turbines, $600 million investment. This pays $2 million a year in annual leases. So there's leaseholders that are receiving annual payments for those wind turbines that we saw earlier. Is there an economic impact? I think so. $2.7 million in annual local taxes. Remember earlier we talked about Senate Bill 232, and we heard that nasty word exemption. So we exempted them from paying the public tangible utility tax. But there's still a payment in lieu of taxes. That's $6,000 to $9,000 per megawatt annually. That made that the largest taxpayer in the history of Van Wert County, and it's, to give you some perspective, it's equal to the top 14 manufacturers combined. Okay, so this is some serious tax revenue going into a community. If you think about all the public services that are provided by local government bodies, it's critical to their management and the services they provide. On the other hand, we look at some of the social discussion that we've referenced. This is just a quick Google search on a number of wind farms in Ohio. Just search wind farm development in Ohio. You won't believe the stuff that you come up with in terms of the headline. Energy zone designation scrapped. Cost county as much as the gains. Residents spar at town hall meeting. I mean, this is kind of painting a picture that it's not something that is universally accepted by everybody. Everybody's going to look at that picture that we showed earlier, and they're going to see something different. All right, real quickly, last visit to the poll. I want to see if those in this room think that they would like to live in a wind farm. I'm interested to see this. All right, let's see if we have any responses yet. Hey, each time we get a better response rate. We're getting more and more participants. This is good. Okay, so would you support, basically the first question is talking about the revenue aspect of it. So would you support more money? Yeah, I mean, it's like that commercial for, I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, who doesn't want more money, right? We could all use more money. Now here's where it gets a little bit interesting. So let's look at, would you purchase a home located in a wind farm? Now that's one, there's very limited amount of research out there on the impact of property values, and part of the reason is there's not a lot of real estate transactions. I think that tells you something in its own right. And of course down here, would you approve or deny? 53% of you would have proceeded, and 47% are unsure. And so really the heart of what I'm getting at, it's this 47% here. It's trying to provide those who are not yet comfortable making a decision with information to make that decision. Okay? So now we're going to talk about what happened in Wyandot County. Just to give you a quick overview, we were looking at a 100-megawatt wind farm. The developer showed up on the county commissioner's doorsteps and they kind of knocked on the door and said, hey, we're with the wind company and we're going to develop a wind farm in Wyandot County. We're currently leasing property from your landowners. And I think I heard the one commissioner's jaw hit the table from my office across the way. He was a bit concerned. So the county commissioners, they were concerned. They were reading those newspaper headings that, that I showed you earlier, and they're thinking, boy, this is something that can be emotionally charged, and we want to make sure that if we're making this decision, that we're making it in the best interest of our entire community. Now, they said they needed data. They came to us and said, what can we do? How do we get some information on this? The other thing that they wanted to make sure of was that they placed more emphasis on the houses that would be located inside the wind farm, so those who would actually have to sit there and look at it. They wanted to place additional value on that. The problem is, I don't know where it's going to be. I just know it's in the county. So there's a big knowledge gap, right? How do we address that? Approach the developer. That's study on wind, we're going to have a wind developer on the team. I'll tell you, it was something that we really had to think through as we proceeded. So the commissioners wanted to do a survey in the county. We put together this team that included universities, so it's kind of like this partnership triangle of university, local community, and industry. And we approached the funding so that it was level. It's not one where we just are partnership on a page, but when you look at the actual funding, it's all from one source. It was leveraged amongst all parties. The parties included OSU Extension, the School of Environment and Natural Resource, the industry, the Regional Planning Commission, and the County Commissioner's Office. One other thing that we did before we proceeded, we gave a one-page agreement to the developer, and there's a copy of it at the back of your handouts. We actually, we had our grant people looking at it, and they ran it through the legal department. We wanted to take the legal language out. It was not a contract. We made no secrets about it. But what it did was, in real clear and simple language on one page, this is a land-grant university. This is OSU Extension. This is what we stand for. This is how we approach this. We don't know the results of this survey research, but we reserve the right to own the data, and we're going to publish and disseminate the results. If you're not comfortable with that, then it's probably better that we don't proceed. And so it worked really well. They went ahead and signed it, and we moved on. I've since used that on I had a partner that wanted to do an economic impact analysis on a energy pipeline, and I gave them that document, and they gave it back to me with a whole bunch of red ink and amendments on it, and I said, thank you, but no thank you. I think you need to find someone else to do your economic impact. If you're not comfortable at this fundamental level of how we approach it, this isn't going to be a good partnership. So a little bit of background on that. So the survey itself, we had a 700 household sample. Because we brought the industry partnership in, we had now an engineering outline of exactly where the wind farm was going to be. We knew exactly what ground they had leased and where they were going to develop it. So we did 100% sampling of the households in that development zone and a representative sampling in the rest of the county. As you can see there, we had a 26% response rate overall and a 30% response rate in the development zone. Quickly touch on the results. Benefits versus concerns. This question was asking basically, do you feel the benefits outweigh the concerns, or do you feel the concerns outweigh the benefits? So we wanted to kind of recognize that it could be viewed through both perspectives. And the thing that's interesting is this group over here that's 36%. Working with audiences related to wind, especially, I did a lot of programs with wind in 2012, 11, 12, 13. Once they make up their mind, it's made up. And so it's this group over here that's still looking for information that we're focused on. So how do we make sure that we're addressing their needs? Now, this was framed up a little bit differently. This was asking, would you support a wind farm developed in your county? This is outside the development zone. This zip code over here is representing the zone where it was actually going to be built. You can see significant drop-off, 73% to 48%. I would suggest that 48%, if we move forward, would actually shrink. Because what happens in year one, when a wind farm is being developed, they say, we need 10,000 acres to get 100 megawatts. And they go get all these development right leases from all these landowners. You move forward a couple years, you go through some of the permitting, you do your environmental analysis, work with public utilities commissions. 3 years later, you say, okay, I know where I'm going to put 50 turbines. And now I just need a production lease from you, and you, and the rest of you, your leases have expired. So now the question is, do you still support that knowing that you don't have a lease? You'll never know because the policy changed. So the project itself has kind of taken a major pivot, but that was something that we were going to certainly monitor. This is busy. I apologize, but there's not an easy way to communicate. The commissioners at the time, I don't know if anyone was following, but 2012, 2013, local government funding was pinched. There was a lot of cuts to balance the state budget. Counties did not have a lot of money at this time. So they wanted to put this in real terms. So, okay, don't just tell me if you like wind or if you oppose wind. But tell me, okay, if you don't like wind, are you willing to pay more, have an increase in property taxes to offset our local budget to provide the services that we provide? Or do you want us to cut services and not have wind? Or do you want us to support wind? Basically, if you kind of summarize it, you combine the top two. Those are the blocks that said we would like to support wind to offset some of our revenue losses in the county. And basically, I think you got 78% that would support that. These next two slides really get at needs assessments. So we presented some potential benefits or potential concerns related to wind. We wanted to see what people actually knew. And what that does is help us identify what do we need to educate that 36% on with our outreach and engagement programs. So a couple of things that stuck out to us as you looked at the top choices. These are all more global in nature. Reduction on foreign energy sources, lower cost of energy generated, greenhouse gas emission reduction. These are all more kind of global issues. It's not until you get way down here where we see generates economic activity, source of local tax revenue. So to me that says we really need to review the policies. We really need to help them understand what is the taxing structure for renewable energy and where does that money go? How does it flow at the local level? On the concern side, I reviewed a lot of survey research related to wind, and this is the first time I've ever seen loss of farmland production show up as the top concern. Normally this is property values or this is view shed. Loss of farmland. So I had to kind of step back and think about what's going on here. And I came across a newspaper article that was titled 15,000-acre Van Wind Farm Approved. So if you kind of take that for what it's worth, you think, wow, that's a lot of acres, right? Now that's 15,000 acres that were leased. And so the actual land use conversion, it's only converting 190 acres. So the rest of that 15,000 is still being farmed. So, I'm wondering, is there a disconnect between, the way that some of the newspapers are covering this and what's actually happening from a land use standpoint? Now, to go along with that, there's certainly some issues related to impact on land during the development phase. So while you may only take a half or 3/4 of an acre of farmland out of production to actually support the turbine, during the development process, you're ripping up 10 acres that surrounds that. And so from a compaction standpoint, from a fuel pile standpoint, those are some issues that could be addressed through programs as well. Kind of wrap things up here. Community outreach. After we had the results from these, and these were left over, we used these reports with some of the classes in the School of Environment and Natural Resource. And with the price breaks, it's amazing. Like for an extra $30, you get 300 more. So, so we went ahead and printed more. So if you're interested in this and want to keep it, by all means, take it with you. If you're not interested with it, you say, boy, I'm just going to throw that in the trash. Leave it up here and I'll use it with another group. But we used these and did some outreach programs with the wind developers. Now, of course, it's an international company, so we did that basically through a webinar. But then we did a lot of local programs. They were all sponsored by a county commissioner's office, the Regional Planning Commission, and the Economic Development Office. So we touched on a lot of those topics that were brought out in terms of the perceived issues and the perceived benefits and some of the things that we thought there may be some disconnect on. We addressed some of those at these outreach and engagement sessions. Now, one of the things that's kind of saddening for me personally going through this experience is that there's a change in state policy that has really altered the future of this project. And so the state has recently changed its setback rules to where a turbine has to be set back a certain distance from the nearest residential dwelling. Now it needs to be set back a certain distance from the nearest property line. And so it's really caused an issue with wind development in the state of Ohio, to where a lot of the developers have really kind of put the brakes on some of their projects. There's some other issues related to the renewable energy market in Ohio and the development, the value of some of the credits and some of the economic benefits of developing these projects are not as fruitful in Ohio as what they are in some of our neighboring states at this time. So unfortunately, the developers kind of put a hold on the project, but with that said, they said there's still a chance that they have enough in it that the leases are held for 7 years, so they're going to kind of monitor the policy and see what happens. There's a potential they could come back and revisit this. One of the things that the commissioners did say was, based on the information that they received, if this process would move forward, they would certainly want to have another survey before they actually approved or denied an energy zone. And just in case I wasn't clear about, I can't remember if I referenced energy zone. So that policy, that 232 that addresses the taxation I referenced, basically what they refer to that is an alternative energy zone. So if your county wants to approve that application to give that tax treatment, they'll establish an alternative energy zone, and then that project can go in under that tax treatment. If they don't, the taxation in Ohio makes it pretty difficult to financially have a project funded. And then just kind of a quote from the commissioners in their office. They said, you know, at the time that we were doing this, even though it was a small amount of money, they were hesitant just because, you know, they said literally we were cutting jobs, we were cutting county jobs because our budgets were so tight. But they said, you know, based on the information that they received and, you know, how it helped kind of frame up what the community was thinking in terms of this project, that it was certainly something that they valued. There's my email address. It's romich.2@OSU. And if anyone's interested, I'll just give you my cell phone number because I travel a lot. If you want to talk more about this or you have questions about anything else related to energy, it's 419-310-8147. And Chris, I guess I'll leave it up to you. I don't know if we have time for questions or if we need to go to Bruce.
We have plenty of time for questions. So
Great.
Maybe have any questions for Eric? That'd be great.
I teach in the county just north of Balding and Van Wert's just a little farther south, and I think the key word you use is perception here, because when they were starting developing all these things, people would come to me and ask and say, I heard that and these almost were always baseless. So are you throughout the whole state now, or do you go around to everywhere?
Yes.
Because I think a lot of education needs to be done on, you know, people are not in the, I'm sure they're in the know for being ignorant.
No, yeah, and I guess to answer your question and maybe expand on it. So yes, I do work statewide. So if there's, you know, if there's a need, call that number I gave you, or send me an email. I'm happy to come help. And to expand on that, you're right. There's a lot of misinformation, and you know, some of it's well organized. So I've seen flyers with bullet points of, you know, that Senate Bill 232. The way that it reads, you know, in the code, it reads, you know, Senate Bill 232 exempts renewable energy companies larger than 250 kilowatts from paying the public tangible utility tax. Period. And so I'll read that in a brochure, but the other part of it is, and sets in place a payment with taxes. So it's just not telling the whole story. So yeah, that's certainly something that we can work with. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You have this outreach event. What do you consider successful event work you have in the community when you're trying to address all that unsure population? You know, it's hard to actually reach out.
You know, you're reaching them.
Right.
Yeah.
So what were some of the events
Yeah.
that you might have, or what would you consider successful?
You know, for one, how do you measure success in terms of, you know, my internal goal of reaching that 36%? That's difficult. In terms of the outreach numbers, they range. So I'd have to go back and pull the program data to see what our total participation was. But I can tell you it ranged, and I never get offended. I mean, this is a great audience. I mean, look at how many people we have here tonight. But I can say that the range would be from probably 45 to 50 people at an event to, I know that we had a couple with the Regional Planning Commission that was like 4 that were actually not members of the Regional Planning Commission, so 4, you know, general public. Part of that may be because it was regional planning, I don't know, but so I guess there was a wide range, and I guess the other thing I can say to expand on that is, you know, we kind of pumped the brakes on some of that after. I think we did 6 events in total because the policy changed and the developer said, you know what, thanks or no thanks, we can't develop anything here. So, but it is a good question. How do we know we're reaching that 36%? The one thing I can say is the further along you get in the development process, the larger the numbers get. So I can think back to 2011. I got a call from the president of Urbana University. He said, "Talk." Sure, let's see. And he kind of, you know, we had it was going to start out as just a KFC event. We were going to do an overview, and now we got a town hall meeting with 300 people, and they're really excited on this. And so all of a sudden, you got 300 people showing up to discuss it. So, you know, it is something that as you move along, more and more people. There's less of a concern in terms of getting people to the event because it's so big in nature. I mean, you're talking about structures that are 500 foot tall, and so people come out to discuss that because it's long. I know a little about that. Probably not any more than you do, to be honest. I actually co-presented with someone from LeadCo a couple years ago at a program in Worcester, and got to know him a little bit. And at that point in time, they were just going through this outreach process, similar to what we did here. They did a lot of surveying in the local communities up in the Cleveland area, basically trying to see, would you support this? Would you oppose this? Would you be interested in purchasing electricity from this project? And the last I heard, they're still looking at putting 3 test turbines up. So, but with that said, I feel like I've heard that for a decade. So I don't have any new insight. I don't think above what you would argue. Other questions? Sir?
I had a question about the motivation for the Blue Creek wind farm. So it's $600 million investment. You're getting the county getting back $2 million in taxes, maybe 2.7 and $2 million, I guess, generated lease agreements. Yeah. So what I'm wondering is, it's a long time to get a repay on that $600 million investment. So I'm wondering, do they have to? I'm just wondering why do they have to already upgrade in some way electricity, or is it environmental?
Okay, so in terms of the motivation for that, think back to that line graph. There was nothing happening in Ohio. All of a sudden, 2008, we signed a policy that's mandating our investor-owned utilities to generate renewable energy, diversify their generation. So if you really get to the heart of it, that's the motivation. It's policy-driven, okay? But, with that, when you look at the economics of it, so the actual developers, they have agreements with off-takers who are purchasing the electricity, and also the way that policy is written. So how do you track renewable generation, right? As they flow through the wires, it looks the same as coal generation, right? Now, the way that they do that is basically it's performance-based. So every megawatt hour that a system generates, it generates 1 credit. It's just tracked electronically, but it has a unique serial number saying this generated a megawatt hour, here's its credit. Those have value. Okay, so to meet that policy, you can buy so many credits. So that kind of helps fill the economic gap a little bit. And I can say that, the rates off of that project, in terms of comparing it with coal, it's tough to have an apples-to-apples comparison when you're comparing it to, a generation facility that's depreciated for 35 or 40 years. But I've seen some of the numbers, and they're pretty competitive. The challenge, once again, it generates when you don't need it as much, so it tends to generate more at night. And then also it's intermittent. So if the wind stops blowing, you got to ramp up your other base load plants to pick up that loss in generation. Other questions? Yes, sir. Most of the agreements and the warranties tend to be in the 25 to 30-year range, but that changes with technology. The blades tend to need replaced a little bit more frequently than that. The one thing I'll say is, with wind, there's not a lot. I never promote it as a real large economic job creation type of a process. So there's a lot of construction jobs in the short term, but after a year and a half when you build it, there's probably 25 to 30 people that actually work there that do routine maintenance on that. That's the one thing with wind compared to solar. With solar, there's very minimal maintenance. It just sits there and works. There's no moving parts. With wind, you have moving blades, you have moving gears, so you're re-lubricating and that type of stuff. So, but most of the lifespans are in the 25 to 35-year range, and then they're always bonded for decommissioning. So they have to post a large bond to make sure there's money there to take them down, even though the scrap value would be astronomical. We got time for a few more, Chris?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Yes, sir.
And it kind of struck me as somewhat odd, because you said how people saw the wind turbines as like they would interrupt the landscape and interrupt the view.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you've ever posed the question, like, would they rather have a coal generating or coal-fired power plant or a wind turbine? Because in my mind,
there's no silver bullet. And you know what? That's why that statement I mentioned earlier that I read sticks with me. All energy decisions have environmental consequences. Some positive, some negative. And you're right. I mean, would you rather have? But the one thing to think about, most of our coal generation, what's it tied to? Water. Tied to water, right? We need that to cool. So this is new. This is a part of the state that typically doesn't deal with energy development, right? It doesn't need water. It can go anywhere. But yeah, you're right. So you need to put it in perspective. Would you rather deal with that
talk that you gave, some of the, you know, the yes, I would want the wind farm in my backyard versus the no when you're unsure. I'm curious about, can you give us an insight into the yes versus the no's? And what I'm getting at here, are you seeing, if you look at age, is there an age preference, younger generations maybe yes versus no? Are you seeing splits on even things like political party or median home income? Is there really any kind of drive?
No, we didn't see that, any differences there. In terms of the age, we didn't have that young versus older population because we were surveying households. And so it was the homeowner. We did some more in-depth cross tabulations for a journal article that is actually under review right now. But for the purposes of the dissemination, like, they wanted to try and keep it somewhat simple for the audience. But what we did was more of an analysis, breaking it down between those within the development zone and those outside the development zone. But there wasn't a whole lot of difference between, you know, what they would their different perceived benefits versus their perceived concerns.
Please forgive me if I missed it, but did you survey residents of the community after these things were installed to see if there's like a change in attitude?
No, and just to clarify, this was done in a community that had a proposed wind farm, so there wasn't development there.
From anywhere else?
I personally not. Purdue University just a couple of years ago did one from kind of a follow-up survey to one of theirs. We did a little bit of focus group research in conjunction with Michigan State University and the Van Wert area. That was in 2012. It was shortly thereafter. Most of the focus group those that did not, and I'm dating myself because it's been a couple years, it was primarily motivated on property taxes. That seemed to be the big, I just built a $200,000 house and now I can't. There was one guy that was going to try and increase Indiana bat population as a means of shutting the turbines down. So, I mean, people really get passionate about this stuff.
Disrupted this project and when community development. Can we find out more information about that bill and what's kind of being done to fight that or whatever you do, the letter writing campaign?
Yeah, Berker and Eckler do a really good job of summarizing some of the renewable energy policy. So if you would Google the Berker and Eckler page, they have nice policy briefs on Senate Bill 3.
We have time for these last two.
Okay.
And we'll take a break before we introduce
So here and then back here. Yep.
So you mentioned sort of the bat. So as an ecologist, I think a little bit about the environmental impact, particularly on bird and bat populations, and you know, back to the reference to wind turbines on Lake Erie. It's a major flyway for lots of migratory bird species. So I'm wondering, what do you know about that? Should we be concerned?
Well, the one thing I can say about that is, as I kind of just generally referenced Senate Bill 232, there's a set of 10 different criteria that have to be met in order to proceed. And so one of those is kind of an in-depth environmental analysis. And I can tell you, the printing cost just to print off all of the studies is like $30,000 just to print all this. And that wasn't just environmental, it was archaeological and all the different checks and balances. But point being is there is a system of checks and balances that's tied to that taxation piece. So until they have all of those pieces in place, it doesn't even get forwarded on to the county commissioners. The last one's in the back. Okay. In this county? Okay. And do you know the age of that? How long that turbine's been there? I wonder if it predates the... Oh, stopped it being built. Okay. So, yeah, so that would kind of speak to the system of checks and balances that's in place.
There was research conducted here at Stone Lab. We had researchers, I think it's from Bowling Green State University, Matt, you remember, that did the microphones on the, put them on top of the castle, and what they were trying to do is listen to bird calls while flying overhead. And what they were able to show is that a lot of that bird migration that happens is really kind of tied to weather patterns, like low fronts and high fronts coming in. And so the idea is that maybe you can turn off the wind turbines at times when you think there might be high movements and things like that. So there is still active research going on in that field. If we could, go ahead.
If anybody didn't get one that wants, I have a couple of extras, and like I said, if you're not interested in instead of throwing it away, just leave it out here. By all means, take them if you're interested in reading them. Anyone?
If we could take some time to thank Eric again for his we'll start up back at 8 o'clock. I'll do a little question and answer here with the professors in the room, make sure that their needs are being met, and then I'll introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Bruce McPheron. So if we can reconvene back up here at 8 o'clock, that'd be great. All right, let's get rolling on our second lecture or talk of the evening. When you hear Bruce speak, it's not really a lecture, it's a very casual, so that was a poor introduction start for me. It's not really a lecture. So great, thank you. So this is the second talk for the evening. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bruce McPheron, who is the Vice President of Agriculture Administration and the Dean of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. Bachelor's at Ohio State, and then Master's and PhD at Illinois, and then a postdoc at LSU, and then spent some time, 20-plus years, 25-plus years, 24 at Penn State. And we've had you fortunately, since 2012. Background in entomology, and a lot of that doing a little genetics work, so entomology as far as crop pests are concerned primarily. But we're very fortunate to have Bruce here. As far as Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory, our funding comes from multiple sources, but about a third of the funding that helps us, operate this lab and do the work we do comes from OSU, specifically the Office of Research and the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences. We, as Ohio Sea Grant, are modeled after the land grant program, and so we have extension agents on staff, very similar to what the work that Eric does. So we have 5 extension agents spread across the 8 counties that border Lake Erie, and their role is to basically take the science that we know about the critical issues plaguing Lake Erie and get that into the hands of the citizens and stakeholders and decision makers that are in those counties. And those extension agents fall under the leadership of Bruce and the College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences. So it's a pleasure to have Bruce up here. You were up here last year also. Yep. And so what I love about Bruce's talk is he rarely comes with PowerPoints. It's really just
hand waving. Yeah. I'm an entomologist and an evolutionary biologist. And the evolutionary biologists that you can do hand waving. They trained you in that.
So I really don't want to take any more time of your time, Bruce, and so I'll let you talk about we didn't have your title at the time we did this, but you're really going to talk about the E.
I'm going to talk about the E.
In the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences. And
you've done a very good job, Chris, articulating that full name, because to most people around the state, I'm the Ag Dean. And so a little history. When I was a student as an undergrad, it was the College of Agriculture. And that's what we dealt with. And I come back all these years later. I was there before most of you were born. I come back all these years later, and it's got this really complicated title that I can't even get on a single business card. I've got to wrap around the back.
Well, we can welcome Bruce and let him have at it then.
So, what does it mean to have all those terms? Now, I always like to kind of get the lay of the land with what kind of audience we have here. So I want to just test out the agricultural expertise here. So show of hands. Eric did it by clickers, so you didn't have to identify yourself. I'm not that technologically savvy, so hands are going up. How many of you are involved in agriculture daily? How many of you had supper tonight? How many of you would like to reconsider your answer to the first question? Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're not something that is not you. In fact, the work that I and my colleagues do, the training that we provide students, is essential to everyone every day. And agriculture is not something that is divorced from our lives. 1.5% of Americans are engaged in that practice of food production. But at least aspirationally, 100% of Americans are engaged in consumption. Now, we can talk a little later, it's sort of off topic, but there are real issues with the disparities in that consumption. 1 in 7 Ohio jobs is related to the field of agriculture as we define it. And 1 in 6 Ohioans was food insecure last year. That's a topic for another day. what I want to focus on this evening is talking about the E in that title and exactly what that might mean. And I think it's an important conversation because as the agriculture dean, the ag dean, I still have a lot of people around Ohio, many of whom are engaged in the business of producing food, who aren't really comfortable with that E. The world has changed. I was the dean at Penn State before I came here. I worked in research administration there. I was an extension educator here in Ohio, down near Cincinnati in Claremont County. Again, before you were born. This is all ancient history. I just say now it was a millennium ago. But the fact is that I've been around agriculture for a long, long time, and I've seen some real changes. So you heard Eric talking about feelings about energy, community input on renewable energy. You know, who doesn't love renewable energy? Well, it turns out that the NIMBY rule applies. You know that acronym? It's audience participation. What's NIMBY? Not in my backyard. Somebody asked about, well, would you rather, ask the question, would you rather have a wind turbine or a coal-fired power plant? Well, fired power plant's not going to be in my backyard, so this is not a question that applies to me. You know, that's someplace else. Electricity comes out of the plug. Food comes from aisle 7 in the grocery store. Or off the menu. Somehow, magically, you look at a piece of paper, and somebody brings you the food. That's really cool. You know, what a great life. Not quite that simple, folks. You heard a little bit of the nuances around renewable energy for Eric. Let's talk about some of the nuances that are tied up with the E in our college. So the first way to think about the E is actually pretty simple. It's pretty obvious. Colleges like ours have for decades and decades had departments or programs or schools associated with them that were focused on natural resource management. Farming's natural resource management in a way. Here in North America, the Corn Belt is man's substitution for high-grass prairie. Knee-high by the 4th of July, right now, except where we had 12 inches of water standing, which is this high with tassels on it. Now, that's just tall grass prairie. So where we cut down big blue stem and Indian grass and a whole bunch of other stuff, you know, that's now a great place with the right rainfall, et cetera, most years, to grow corn. And when you go west into the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains, because our weather patterns go west to east, and then the clouds come up and dry out, and it's dry on the eastern side of the mountains. That was short grass prairie, and we now grow wheat there, another short grass. So, you know, farming is just natural resource management. We've just switched the plants around a little bit. But we've also dealt with things like trees and wild critters. You know, that's a natural part of colleges like ours. It's always been a part. But somehow, until the 60s and into the 70s, that wasn't really environment. That was management. It was about producing timber, producing other wood products. It was often about managing pest animals rather than thinking about some of the other elements of non-livestock animals. And so that was a very, very logical piece. I touched on this because of the prairie comparisons, but another piece of what we do in a college like ours is production. We grow stuff. There's a need to feed, folks. There's a need to feed. How many people in the world? Round numbers, I'll let you get to the nearest 100 million. Actually, we've steamed past 6. We're between 7.2 and 7.5 somewhere, because this is an imprecise science. I just saw new UN predictions of population growth just last week. The new predictions, we were saying 10 billion by 2050. The projections now are 11 billion. India, within a couple of years, will pass China as the biggest country in the world. Within a decade, Nigeria, small little West African country, will displace us as the third most populous nation in the world. We've got this whole continent that we call home, and they're a small little country that encompasses, the size of a few of our eastern states. They're going to have more people in that real estate than we have in our entire country. The world's changing. And one common denominator is they do aspire to eat. So how do we feed them? Have you heard the statistics? How much more food do we need? We need to go about 60 to 70% more food available than we have today in order to feed that 10 or 11 billion. Now, some people say we need to produce 60 or 70% more food. The fact is we just need to have available 60 or 70% more food. And the reason that is such an important distinction is that we actually have a lot of food that doesn't get to the right place. Okay? We eat too much. And there are a lot of people around the world that don't eat enough. Prenatal to pre-K, think about that age range. You don't get enough to eat then, you have a severe chance of not growing into a healthy, thriving adult. That is the critical time for food. And we have millions and millions of children not having access to enough nutritious food, while in parts of our country we sit on lots of food. Parts of Western Europe, they sit on lots of food. The developed countries have a lot of food. So it's not that we need to produce more, we may just need to figure out more efficient ways to get it distributed. The other piece is waste. We throw away 40% of the world's food. Michigan State did a study just at their campus, and they discovered in their dining halls they were wasting 70% of the food that they purchased. So we've got this need to feed. And every form of energy has its consequences. Every form of growing food has its consequences. There's another statistic that's almost more important than the number of people we expect in the world. And that is the number of people in the world who have had their income rise and now are part of the middle class. Any thoughts? Students? Staff, answer that. I don't want to hear. Students, what do you think? Why does the middle class matter? What happens when we become middle class? We're all middle class, so we may not even think about this. Yeah. You tend to spend more, and you want to spend it on different stuff. You want meat. You want meat protein. And over again, as we've seen countries develop a middle class, it is the same pattern. They add animal protein to their diet. If you haven't had chemistry and physics yet, you'll hear about these laws of thermodynamics. They really are laws. They really do carry some weight. As you move through a system of production, you lose energy at each step. And so when we make the transition from a plant-based diet to an animal-based diet, it's just the way it is. You do not capture all the energy that was originally captured from the sun. You lose it through metabolic processes. And so however we do it, the act of providing meat to a more affluent population has environmental consequences because we have to produce more of something in order to accomplish that. Now, here's the easy answer. Just tell the Chinese they don't get meat. I'm going to Beijing in October, maybe I should take a flyer and say, sorry, folks, cut down on your pork consumption. Why would I be allowed to tell them that? Just because we've learned hard lessons about a variety of different things, developing economies who are coming into the ability to do things, they have to make their own way. We can provide input. We can provide lessons learned. But we cannot be so presumptuous as to say, here's what you must do. If you think about this, if you pay attention to the news, with all of these various treaty discussions of all different sorts, any kind of subject, the sticking point is often one party being seen as telling the other party what they will do, rather than coming up with a consensus about what we should do. I'm telling you what you should do. Well, it doesn't work very well. It's not a very sustainable practice, but we have a need to feed. So we have to grow, continue to raise our productivity, but we also need to think about how we distribute, and we need to think about how we cut waste. And then there's a whole bunch of issues we could talk about the production methods themselves. I'm going to come back and give you just a few examples of things happening in the college. Then the third thing, so you've got classically, you can imagine this is part of the E, the environment, natural resource management. We've now talked a little bit about the fact that just in production, the ag part of our college, there's an environmental component there. And then the other place where the E comes in is what I call the externalities. It's all of the other sorts of things. I jotted down a few ideas. It's policy, it's human-environment interface, biodiversity, energy, and bioproducts. Energy is, if we talk about bioenergy, it's really just a bioproduct. The ethanol, the 10% ethanol at your gas pump, it's just a bioproduct. It happens to be something you can burn in your car. But it's something we've taken a biological substrate and turned it into another product. I could go on and on, but invasive species, microbes, etc. Well, we're very fortunate. I think we're fortunate in our college, CFAES. We're a comprehensive college. We have folks working in disciplines that represent essentially a miniature university. We have engineers. We have educators, education professionals, training certified teachers. We have sociologists. We have economists. We have biological scientists, physical scientists. It's really a great heterogeneity of expertise, and we're a comprehensive college inside one of the world's most comprehensive universities. The Ohio State University has 15 academic colleges, and they truly span the full breadth of disciplines that you can imagine. And so the good fortune we have is we have ready-made interdisciplinary collaborations. These problems will not be solved by any single science. And I'm hoping that as you have the experience through classes and those of you that are doing research, the light bulb begins to come on that, I may be attracted to a particular type of science, but I'm going to have to partner with people with other science in order to really solve the problems that I'm interested in. And think about the greenness just outside the door here. There's not a single answer to that issue. Last year, we turned off the taps in Toledo for 2 days, right? First weekend of August. Last weekend of the State Fair, that's how I remember I was standing at the State Fair with ODNR Director Zeringer and ODA Director Daniels, and they were on the phone constantly with the governor about what was happening while we went through this. And if you were to go back and review a lot of the media spots that happened, you would see a number of cases where people sometimes standing in grocery store parking lots getting bottled water would say the answer is just to stop farming. Wait a second, what's behind you? Looks like a grocery store to me. Where did that come from, folks? And, it's complicated. It's policy. It's the economics. Are you willing to pay twice as much for your food if we were to produce it a different way? What are the nutrients that's causing the green? Phosphorus, okay. We think the phosphorus helps, it exacerbates the growth of the algae, and the nitrogen probably exacerbates the production of toxin. Gross simplification, a lot of other variables, but those are two major variables. What else does phosphorus and nitrogen do? Helps plants grow. So if we're going to produce plants, we've got to get them phosphorus and nitrogen. Well, maybe we need to get them the right amount. This year, where in parts of northwest Ohio, the Maumee drainage that comes into this section of Lake Erie, we had farmers who did absolutely everything right. Absolutely everything, every best practice you could imagine. They applied that to their growing conditions. And a foot of rain in a month destroys it all. There's no way that you could, absent not having crops there, and still you, in most of those fields, because of nutrients being in the soil, you would have had nutrient loss from the fields. So even not growing crops would have created a problem. If something like a foot of rain in a month, there really is no defense against that. So we've got just a whole set of balances if we're going to really work our way through, and it really requires a comprehensive approach to this. Let me give you a few examples. I don't want to go on forever, and I'm well known, right, Chris, for going on forever. So stop me if you've heard this one, but let me just give you a couple of examples of what happens in a college like ours around some of these topics. So let's go back to natural resources management. We have one of the world's experts on coyotes. Stan Garrett is a professor in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. Did you know that coyotes are in every major city in North America? They have taken up residence. I was going to say there is as abundant as feral dogs and cats, except the cat populations are down because the coyotes chase them down and eat them. But, that's become human-animal interactions. Coyotes are wild animals. They're in the woods. And they're in your garbage can in the back alley. And Stan Garrett is working in Chicago with radio tag systems to really understand the behavior and movement of urban coyotes, to begin working with other folks to understand hybridization that's occurring with domestic dogs and how that affects behaviors. That's an element of the kind of thing that we do in our college. What else? You're working at Stone Lab, the nation's oldest freshwater biology laboratory. Down in Columbus, the School of Environment and Natural Resources managed the Shearmeyer Wetland Center on the Olentangy River. And those of you who are Ohio State students have seen this past year a dramatic change in the Olentangy River. It used to be, it filled that bank up pretty much edge to edge. Now there's actually a channel, and they've got these little pools. So we've got a team of folks, Vijay Sullivan is one of the leads, but there are several faculty working on this, who are actually understanding what happens when you restore a system like that. What does it do to water cycling? What does it do to flooding? What does it do to the flora and fauna in that ecological setting? And it's really important to understand that because there's a great move nationally to remove what are called low-head dams that were put into place over the last 50 to 60 years. And there are ecological implications of that. And so, the ability to work in that sort of area is really quite critical. What else? Let's turn to production. And I talked a little bit about our crop and livestock management. We have some of the world's leading soil scientists. Tom Lall in our School of Environment and Natural Resources is renowned worldwide. He's worked on all sorts of soils. He's one of the acknowledged experts in carbon sequestration. And because of Ratan's reputation, we recently hosted the French Agricultural Minister, Stéphane Le Foll, on campus, where he talked to us about his aspirations. So he's sort of the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture version in France. And his goal is to implement policies underlaid by best practices that farmers can actually adopt to basically make agriculture in France carbon neutral in 10 years. You don't hear politicians in the U.S. talking about the science behind something like carbon sequestration and carbon neutrality. This guy, he answered questions. It's not that he just was prepped and he had a speech that he read. He understood some of the biology and physics behind all of what he was talking about. It's an audacious, ambitious goal. But we have that kind of mind coming to challenge us. In November, our college will host a guy named Cardinal Turkson. Cardinal was not his first name, it was his title. He's a Catholic cardinal. He wrote the Pope's recent encyclical on the environment. And he will spend 3 days on the Columbus campus and give a major presentation. That's the kind of interaction that a presence in the environment like we have in our college actually generates. Water. I know we've had a turnover of students. Some of you have been here for the summer. But a few weeks ago, my colleague Jay Martin talked about an initiative called Field to Faucet. Between that Field to Faucet initiative, something in our college, and work that we've done with the Ohio Department of Higher Education, who runs all of the public universities and community colleges in the state. We have 23 projects on harmful algal blooms. The consequences, it's truly, we chose Field to Faucet because it truly is looking at what we can do at the production level and looking at what's happening at the consumption level. Because if you're a Toledo resident and you've got a couple of little kids at home and you wake up on a Saturday morning and the radio's telling you, television really listens to the radio than me, you're hearing from the media, you saw the tweet. Because you could say this in 140 characters, don't drink the water. If you see that on a Saturday morning, you're not really going to, I can't expect you to have a well-formed opinion about the nuances of how you make sure that your water is safe. Water out of your tap is a right, correct? I deserve it. Can't take that away from me. Well, we did for 50 hours. Yeah. So we've got to get on this, and we've got to think about, we're not going to change agricultural production in 2 years. But we may be able to better understand whether nutrient-laden water comes more off the surface or out of subterranean tiles. We might be able to complete some work on whether there are ways, it's dry in the middle of the summer. It's rainy in the spring and this year early summer, but in the middle of the summer it's pretty dry. And if you drained your fields when it was rainy, about August, you want that water back. And there are actually ways to do that. Your tiles empty into ditches, which empty into creeks, which empty into rivers, which empty into lakes. And you can actually set up systems where you can manage how fast that water actually leaves your field. It can drain out of the growth zone, out of the root zone, but not so far that it's not accessible later when the roots are deeper and the water potential in the ground has reduced a little bit. It's expensive to do. More expensive than just having a tile empty into that ditch. But we can understand the science behind this and actually talk about maybe what we do with our government presence is actually incentivize those kind of behaviors. That's a policy question that could be informed by good science. At the other end, what do you do if you're a water operator? You're sitting there in the plant and you do the test and it says you've got microcystin in there and it exceeds what are we this year, 0.1 or 0.3 parts per billion. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. But the fact is you've detected it. What do? Well, the standard treatment is actually to add powdered activated carbon, charcoal. And this is oversimplifying and unfair to water operators everywhere. But essentially, what did we put in last year? You know, there's a science that we can add to this. We actually could do basic high school chemistry and titrate a few things with water quality and toxin levels and give a range of specific advice on exactly how to affect that treatment and be a little more proactive in helping when it gets all the way through to that system. Those are the kinds of projects we're working on. The monitoring buoys that you can see online are part of the investment in this field of faucet and the higher education investments. Collectively, we've rolled up, we put $1 million in, and my $1 million is not only going to people in College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences, it's going to people in the College of Engineering who are actually trying to devise a real-time in-place sensor for microcystin, the toxin that we're worried about. It's going to the College of Public Health, who's looking at ways you can actually improve the testing mechanisms. Justin is busy doing ELISA tests with antibodies, and if we can develop more sensitive tests that are more robust, we might be able to do more quantifiable real-time measurements. My money is going to Heidelberg University, not even my university, because the answers to these problems come from partnership among people with different expertise. There is no one scientist who can fix this. It's only by working together and having everyone pulling on the oars that we're going to make it happen. Let's talk about some of the externalities. We can always come back and talk about any topic you want, but let's talk about biodiversity. That's not something far. They actually do now. They got hammered pretty hard over monarch butterflies. Look at the monarch story. You've got lots of milkweed out here, so you're trying to do your heavy lifting. You're doing your part to increase that population. Turns out that in terms of real numbers, scientifically verified, the impact on monarch butterflies of getting hit by cars on the road while they're flying around is greater than the impact of consuming any BT-laden pollen. Okay? Now, there is an implication of genetically modified crops for monarch behavior and biology. And that is that we effectively do kill the weeds, and milkweed is a weed. And so the populations of milkweed plants, the host plants, have declined. You know, do we want food? Do we want monarch butterflies? I'm an entomologist. Yeah. I want to eat while I'm watching the monarch butterflies. But the other piece of this is down in Mexico where monarchs overwinter. And weather events and logging are actually much more serious drivers on monarch butterfly populations than anything we do up here where the caterpillars are growing. And is that out of our control? Biodiversity is actually something that's very much tied into agriculture. We do lots of monocultures. If you think about, you guys aren't old enough to think about this, but your great-grandparents had farms in these same areas, and they had 4, 5, 6 different crops that they grew in rotation. And some of those crops brought nitrogen back into the soil because alfalfa mixes nitrogen and clover mixes nitrogen and replenishes. And then you plant corn, which eats nitrogen, and then you follow it. So there was a whole rotation that worked at soil health. And you had fence rows, and that supported all kinds of birds and other vertebrates. So biodiversity and the consequences of how we grow food have always been very closely tied together. But it's also an issue in our cities. So Mary Gardner, one of my colleagues in entomology, has a project funded by the National Science Foundation. She's working in Cleveland in vacant lots. And she's looking at reestablishing diverse areas within these abandoned lots and looking at what that does to the biological diversity, and she's partnering with sociologists to look what it does to the communities as well. how do they value? An article, if you Google this and look last week, an article in the Cleveland Plain Dealer about the fact that right now they don't value it because they think it looks like wheat. But, the response is you have to get these plants established. What she's trying to do is bring in a mix of various native species that will increase butterflies, bees, all sorts of pollinators, bring birds and other sorts of things in, and actually create, both a biodiverse location, but also something that does, in fact, have value to the community. So, I'm glad to have folks working on issues like that. Eric really covered energy just really, really well. But, one of the messages I hope you take home from his talk is just how complicated this is. You cell-phoned answered, and you were pretty divided on your opinion. I was really intrigued, Eric, by you talked about the definitely yes and definitely no and the definitely maybe. And the definitely yes and definitely no are pretty set in their ways. You can go to the scientific literature, and we could have this conversation about renewable energy. We could have it about just wind energy. We could have it about GMOs. We could have it about local. And it's the same distribution. It's about a 25-50-25 distribution. And the 25 on either end, right or wrong, are not going to change their opinion. And it's the 50 in the middle that we're working on any issue. And it just shows up time after time after time. How do we get that message out? Well, part of it is meeting with those groups, as Eric has described. That's the value of our extension enterprise in our college, because you're getting more science than you like in your classes. We're taking science in different words out to communities and helping them try to understand what's going on. One thing Eric didn't talk about, because it's a little bit outside the purview of energy, we could talk about energy from the context of how we produce our food. We could talk about it from the purview of the perspective of how we distribute our food. Coffee drinkers and coffee. Local food advocates. How many of you raised your hand both times? Yeah. Do not complain to me about a global food system sitting in Starbucks. Do not do it. Do not complain to me about corporate control of your food over a corporately managed web network using a corporately produced handheld device. You're studying science. It's your responsibility to think about the data and align your thinking, align your perspectives. I'm not telling you where to end up. I'm simply telling you align your perspectives. And that, in fact, is one of the values of the educational process, that you're exposed to logical thinking about things. We're all illogical. We are very, very illogical. And those of us in jobs like mine spend way too much time trying to convince that 25% whose opinion is fixed in the opposite direction from whatever mine is, that they ought to change their opinion. They're not going to. They believe it for very personal reasons. And, just because I want to tell you the science is not going to make you change your mind about this. We have to agree to have a conversation a different way. But, what I'm telling you is if you're in that middle 50%, ensure that you're thinking about how you align the different pieces that make you an independent thinker. And don't get caught in the fallacy of being illogical in your sequence. So just think about those things that are important to you. I got sidetracked. Sorry for the sermon. Energy, food system. Plants need nitrogen, right? Where does nitrogen fertilizer come from? Two main sources. One comes from natural gas utilization, or two, it comes from animal food. In terms of animal production, or in terms of plant production and commercial agriculture, we either use nitrogen that has taken up natural gas to fix it through a chemical process, or we recycle it back out of animal food. All right? And either way is energy. Remember I said that going through livestock production, because we want animal protein, just by thermodynamic laws, we lose part of what we put in at the front end. And part of what we put in the front end is actually fossil fuels. Oh, by the way, I buy a lot of organic produce, but I buy it for quality and price. I sometimes buy it because I know the producers and I want to support them. I make a conscious decision to support their businesses. I do not buy it because it's energy efficient or because it doesn't use pesticides, because neither of those is any more true for organic production than it is for conventional production. A field of soybeans, whether soybeans is the right thing to grow or not, today generally requires 3 trips of the tractor per year. A tractor to plant it in stubble that has not been tilled, a tractor to spray the weeds, and a tractor to harvest. And if you planted the same field organically, you would have to plow, you would have to disc, you might have to harrow, you would have to plant, you would have to cultivate maybe twice. You might even spray, you might spray a different thing than you sprayed in the conventional production, and then you still have to harvest. And we're up to 8 or 9 passes of tractors. That's soil compaction, that's energy use. All has to be factored in, folks. That's an environment, that's an E in CFAES. Not one you might think about, but it's an E. So, the answer is not what you do, the answer is what you think about when you're deciding what to do. Okay, one last thing. And that's microbes. I love it. I'm an entomologist. I used to say bugs are the most important organisms in the world. I still believe it. But I've had to acknowledge that actually we're all just big bags of microbes. And so we talk about E. A really important emerging environmental issue is what we call microbial ecology. How you process your food, how you process your food, how I process my food is more dependent on the critters we have living in our guts than any differences in our DNA. It's differences in DNA, but it's the microbes' DNA, not ours. How we respond to medicines is often a direct result of the microbes we carry around. All of the things we talk about in biomass renewable energy are dependent upon microbes, which are natural residents of various organisms' guts. And so one of the things that we're discovering that has opened up a whole new E world is the environmental components of the microbes that make us up. And I think it's an incredibly fascinating area. I mean, this is truly one of the emerging topics that I think is going to drive a lot of advances in productivity. How do you manage the soil microbes? Maybe it's less about soil per se than soil that carries certain microbe suites. How do we change products from one thing to another using microbes? What are the health, wellness, nutritional implications for us, for the animals we're dealing with of microbes? What are the dangers to us? Think about all the new diseases you can think of. SARS. 2 people in Ohio have West Nile right now diagnosed. Lyme disease. AIDS. All microbes that have moved to humans from animals. So part of the microbial ecology is not just the ones in us, but the ones trying to get into us. And because of the increase in population, we have greater juxtaposition between organisms that we didn't live close to before, and these quickly evolving microbes are jumping across. We're not having poultry shows at county fairs. Tomorrow morning I'm stopping in Tiffin at the Seneca County Fair. Was at the Union County Fair in Marysville last night. No chickens, no turkeys, no ducks. By the way, great posters about what it took to raise their animals, because they didn't have to get rid of the animals, they just couldn't bring them to the fair because of avian influenza. Now, you've heard of bird flu before because, we go get our flu vaccines in the fall, and it's largely because of the bird swine flu mix-up that switches flu genes every year, and we're susceptible every year to a new suite of them. There are bird flu strains that actually are just extraordinarily devastating to poultry production. These are moved around by wild birds. Talked about being on the flyway here. We expect in the fall, when the temperature cools down and flu season, even in birds, comes back up, that the migratory birds coming through Ohio will bring avian influenza here, but no documented cases. But just to give you a sense of the magnitude of this, egg prices have tripled because of avian influenza. Ohio was the #2 state in egg production, behind only Iowa. They killed so many chickens in Iowa because of avian influenza that we're now #1. They killed 28 million birds in Iowa because of avian influenza. And it's directly tied to nature, to the environment, to biodiversity. So it's a complex world we live in. The thing that I love, folks, is that my college thrives on complexity. We do incredible stuff in a variety of different areas. You heard the energy. I could have brought 300 different people here tonight working on different topics, and they would have been able to tell you, it would have been a long time. They do all of these different things, but they all connect together. And the sum total is that, we're trying to deal with that issue of 11 billion people. We're trying to deal with that middle class of over 2 billion people that are emerging among those 11 billion. We're trying to deal with how you actually do this in a healthy way. Foods that actually cure and prevent cancer. We're trying to do this in a way that we have the highest respect for the environment, and so that our successors on Earth will actually have the same kind of natural attributes that we have. So, happy to answer questions for a couple of minutes. I think we have to get to the ferry before too much time passes.
Right. I think we have a lot of time for questions.
Yeah, thank you.
As the director of the agriculture in Ohio State, what are your top 5 recommendations for the farmers and to reduce the food green algae situation?
Step 1 is do soil tests, because you need to know there's a certain range of nutrients. Plants need these nutrients to grow, but if you have more than you need, they can't use the excess. They don't soak it up and store it. And so it stays in the soil or it runs through. And so the single biggest thing is do soil tests on a regular basis and adjust the amount of nutrients that you apply. Do watch the weather. You can't predict every storm, but in fact, our weather prediction capability is pretty good. And so when you apply the nutrients that you need, put them on at the right time, relative to plant growth, relative to weather conditions to the extent that you can. There's clear evidence to suggest that actually incorporating those nutrients into the soil rather than having them on the surface is critically important. There's a little controversy there because aren't we supposed to no-till? Isn't it bad to till the soil? The fact is that we're probably going to have to come up with sort of a happy medium here. That's 3. I may run out of steam before I get to 5, because there are a lot of different things. Cover crops are a really important piece of this. And again, no-till and cover crops does a lot of stuff. It helps to slow down the infiltration of rain. It also helps to hold on to some of the nutrients, and then you can reincorporate it as more complex organic matter into the soil, which eventually will be accessible to the plants you're growing. But no-till and cover crops actually clearly make more channels vertically through the soil, which are called macropores. And it's possible that one of the consequences of having that great soil structure is that when you do put nutrients at the top, if you get a severe rain event, right down to the tile. So should another recommendation be don't tile? Well, in this part of the state, a tiled field on average perceives a 30% yield increase relative to untiled fields. This was the Great Black Swamp. This was swampland. And it's drained, it's not going back to swamp. But the fact is that, you know, there's a give and take there. I may not have gotten to 5, but you get the idea. That
Dr. Reuter, who speaks in Columbus, he said that the ethanol situation where they're just doing corn, and they're not rotating the crops is a big issue.
Well, it depends on the mechanisms you use to apply the nutrients, and corn is a nitrogen fiend, less so phosphorus, but they do require phosphorus, but corn needs that nitrogen, and so it does bring you back to applying fertilizers on a regular basis. Again, doing regular soil testing and balancing what you put on to the actual needs of the plant is a really critical issue. And this is complicated, folks. We've got one study that demonstrates that a field that has not had any fertilizer applied now for 11 growing seasons is still shedding phosphorus at a rate that's about 30 times higher than a neighboring field. No phosphorus applied. It's had crops growing on it for 11 field seasons with no additional phosphorus applied. And it still is losing phosphorus at about 30 times all of the other fields that we're measuring in this study. I'm not doing any of this. Full disclosure, I am the veneer of the college. Unless you want to talk about bugs, where I can get right down to business, I know about this much about everything we're doing, but I know who to tell you to talk to. So, you know, what's the deal here? Well, you know, for 10 years prior to that, the farmer, a different guy, put chicken litter from his operation on that field without ever doing any soil tests. So we've just built up such a huge bank of nutrients in that particular field. It doesn't matter what you're doing with plants. And it doesn't matter that you're not applying any new nutrients because you've got this legacy problem. And so it's really very complicated to get to the bottom of this. Yes?
How well are the sustainability teams from your talk integrated into ag department language?
I think we're a leader. You know, and I think the boat is rising for everybody.
It's going to affect someone's profit margin.
Yeah, it will.
Reducing meat intake has a strong response from national meat organizations like Meat Science.
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah. And from a lot of consumers. You know, consumers are fickle voters. You know, we don't come up with one. I'll give you an example. And, you know, another big topic off environment is animal care and welfare. A few years back, California passed Proposition 2. Proposition 2 instructed that farmers would produce chickens, eggs particularly, but veal and pork using certain new animal care standards. And they had actually until this next year with eggs to accomplish that. Different time frames every place. 65% of California voters supported that. The National Grocers Association has done market basket surveys in California grocery stores where these products are already available. 5% of California food buyers buy food produced that way, largely because it's one hell of a lot more expensive. And so, you know, figuring out whose ox is getting gored is a really difficult issue, and I think our colleges have shied away a little too much from that in the past. One of the things we're doing at Ohio State is we have 2 initiatives. We've embraced these grand challenges we call the discovery themes. And we're bringing faculty groups together around issues. And our college leads 2 different initiatives in aspects of sustainability. Our college developed a new major, Environment, Economy, Development, Sustainability, about 3 years ago. It's gone from 0 to nearly 200 majors. There's an appetite for this, and I think we need to be in the mix with good science.
Any more questions in the back?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the lake people could tell you a lot more of this, but the deal is this. The land use around the other Great Lakes is significantly different. The hydrologic dynamics of the other lakes is significantly different. And I think it's largely a combination of those 2 things that has the greatest impact on what we see here in this Petri dish. I was telling somebody earlier today, I was with some colleagues from Minnesota 2 weeks ago. We were at a meeting out in the Midwest, and somehow the subject of the land of 10,000 lakes came up, and it was right after the harmful algal bloom forecast that we hosted here, and I said, well, Ohio is the land of 10,000 Petri dishes. Think about it. Our lakes are this deep, and they get warm, and it's like being in an incubator. And we give them a really enriched medium. And we've got 22 different bodies of water in Ohio that are significantly impacted by harmful algal blooms. And the agricultural and other land use portfolio around those 22 lakes is not the same. So it's not one size fits all. We've got a fairly good idea in the western basin of Lake Erie what some of the input issues are. But 35% of Ohio's private septic systems are in failure status. That's not pointing fingers and saying it's not agriculture. That's just saying, and we need to do other things. So it's complicated, and I think one of the saving graces when you look particularly upstream is very, very different portfolio of land uses. A lot more forest land. A lot less urban and very much less agriculture, particularly row crop agriculture.
So it's just to follow up, in the watershed, we have the most agricultural land in the Lake Erie watershed, 2nd most in basically pasture land, most amount of people. So you've got nutrient input from people, and the least amount of forest. And our wetlands are more than Superior and Ontario, but we only have about 10% of historic wetlands remaining. Right. So Dr. McPheron is right. The land use in Lake Erie that makes it very susceptible to that. But you are seeing blooms in places like Saginaw Bay and Green Bay. So there are certain regions of other Great Lakes. We can take some time to again thank Dr. McPheron. So coming up is what you're seeing. So next Thursday's lecture, I know most of the students in here will be gone. Some of you will stay on to take the next set of courses. But even if you're back at your home, you can log on. This is on the web, so this is a webinar that's running right now. But our research lecturer will be Dr. Kristen Fussell, who works with Ohio Sea Grant Stone Laboratory, and she's going to do some, basically some benthic macroinvertebrate talk about Dracaenids or Hexagenia mayflies. And then our guest lecturer is the director of the Ohio EPA, Greg Butler, will be here next Thursday. And one thing I want to do very quickly, I missed it between the 2 talks that I forgot to do. I want to go around to our professors and make sure they don't have any announcements. So, Dr. Ludson, do you have any announcements for your students? Everything's good. Dr. Kane, anything for Field or Field Ecology, sorry?
Field Ecology up here at 8 for the last lecture.
8 for the last lecture. Mark or Jeff, do you have any comments for your students?
Yeah, Doc, by 7:30 students, and make sure you have that exercise done.
I have one too. At 10 o'clock, I'm going to be down by the docks with a small telescope and looking at the moon and Saturn for anyone interested.
The last thing I want to mention, Bruce mentioned it also with the $1 million that he put out of his college. I really just wanted to take time to, he kind of glanced over that, and I want to make sure that we really recognize that. Because it's that $1 million, it's that $1 million that really, I think, motivated the $2 million that came from the Ohio Department of Higher Education. And so it was Bruce's, effort and his vision and seeing that was important to mobilize an effort to addrss archaeological blooms that really got the state to come forward and put another $2 million in. So those 23 projects across 10 different universities, you could be argued that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the leadership of Bruce. So, thanks everybody for coming tonight, and hopefully we'll see some of you next Thursday then.